If you're into endurance sports or you're just a woman in your 20s, 30s or 40s, then you have no doubt seen influencers on your feed talking about ferritin levels or cortisol levels. In fact, both cortisol and ferritin levels have been trending as we're seeing influencers telling us about how it's affecting our face, our bodies, and can explain a whole bunch of stuff what is happening. So in this video, I'm going to ask, do influencers prey on health anxieties? Now, I'm sure, like me, you've seen a number of influencers all over your social media saying things like, comment X for my free guide on how to reduce your cortisol levels, or sign up for this to reduce your cortisol levels, or what to do if you have low ferritin. Or perhaps it's kind of reels making jokes around cortisol or ferritin levels. Maybe you've even seen buy this product or subscribe to this service. Perhaps it's not even obviously an ad. Maybe it's just an influencer talking about their everyday experiences and how this product they use has been life-changing. But they're not selling you it, it's just them telling you about it. It's not even obvious it's an ad, it's just your friendly content creator yapping on about their favourite product and how it's changed their life. My answer to my question right now, do influencers prey on our health anxieties, is going to be, yeah, it's undeniable. We've all seen it. But why is it happening? And this is where I want to draw on my academic research and 20 years research experience as a university criminologist who's interested in consumer harms and corporate crime. The obvious answer to the question is it's happening because influencers are unscrupulous people who peddle misinformation, will sell any old shit to make a quick bit of money. They're preying on our aesthetic and our physical insecurities. They're preying on the fact that most of us feel tired all the time. They prey on the fact that women's health is notoriously under-researched and underfunded. They know that, we know that, and telling us this makes us feel a sense of trust towards them. And yeah, you understand me, I understand you, I connect with you. That builds the trust between us and influencers who we follow. It makes us more convinced then when they identify a whole bunch of things which we recognise as affecting us. It might be low energy levels, or the puffy face, or a constantly bloated stomach no matter how much diet and exercise you do. It might be the black bags under your eyes, or the broken sleep you're struggling with every night, or waking up at 3 a.m. But then after describing these symptoms we identify with, they tell us they have found their own cure or perfect solution. And this isn't just an anecdotal observation based on the algorithms I see as a 40-something-year-old ultramarathon runner who probably has terrible iron levels and raised cortisol. But there's actual research evidence behind this too. Research, for example, by those such as Tiller et al. In 2026 actually showed how wellness brands can intentionally pathologize things which happen to us normally. So by this, what I mean is it makes out that something like bloating or tiredness, fatigue is a medical problem and not something which we might just experience day to day anyway. Because by rebranding it as a medical issue, it encourages us to buy something to solve a medical problem. It also makes us question our health and can cause some anxieties we might have, because all of a sudden we might start thinking there's something wrong. Is there something more serious to explain why I can't lose weight, or why my face is puffy, or why I always feel bloated? The problem is when we're talking about things like ferritin, so that relates to iron levels, or cortisol, so that relates to stress levels, is that these are things which are only measured by bloods. So we need a blood test in order to actually look at these biomarkers. And the danger is that if we try and self-diagnose ourselves with these problems, is that we might try and self-manage it. So iron supplements are something which should be prescribed by a doctor, and only after our iron levels have been checked and our symptoms discussed with a medical professional. Iron's a heavy metal, and too much of it can be dangerous and toxic. So there's another research study I want to talk about by Nickel et al., which came out also in 2026, which looked at the research question, how do social media posts discuss popular medical tests with potential for overdiagnosis or overuse? And they answered this by doing something called a content analysis. So that's where you systematically analyse the content. And in this case, the content was posts from Instagram and TikTok. And they analysed nearly 1,000 posts. They concluded in this cross-sectional study of social media posts about 5 popular medical tests, most posts were misleading or fail to mention important harms, including overdiagnosis or overuse. These data demonstrate a need for a stronger regulation of misleading medical information on social media. So therefore, like these authors, you might be asking the question, well, why isn't more being done to stop this? Although it might not seem like it, stuff is being done. And in the UK, advertising is monitored and regulated by the Advertising Standards Authority, or the ASA. They're responsible for regulating all advertising, which includes social media adverts as well. All adverts have to follow a set of codes and standards. And that's also why when a content creator is using a gifted product or has a partnership with a brand, in their post, it should really, really clearly state that it's an ad. The powers the ASA have then is that they can require a post to be taken down if it's misleading, if it's got problematic information, if its claims are inaccurate, or if it's offensive or giving out dangerous information. The problem is that by the time they request it to be taken down, a lot of people can already have seen it. And this is one of the biggest problems with a reactive style of regulating and enforcing advertising. The ASA has specific rules and advice around what can be claimed and what can be said, particularly in relation to food supplements, which is where things like iron supplements would sit under. Although when I was reading their advice on advertising food supplements, I noticed it's full of really weird food puns, and I love a pun, but I was not expecting to find all these pun jokes there. So if you enjoy a pun, then have a read of the ASA guidance on food supplements. Although the ASA have been doing crackdowns on things like hormone claims and do these kind of social media checks around and monitoring of social media posts, one of the problems is the restrictions are almost always focused on health professionals or people who have some kind of claim to a health status in their bio. So this would actually include people who call themselves gut health specialists, nutrition coaches as well. The less clear area is when you've just got a generic content creator or influencer. So let's say a running influencer or just a general lifestyle influencer talking in general about their personal experiences of a product or service they have used. And they're not doing it as an advert, they're just talking about how this particular product has healed them or given them a cure. An academic called Maria Wellman published a paper in February 2026 which explored this blurred line between influencers with expertise or supposed expertise and experts with influence. Now, the kind of key difference here is that influence with expertise might be that their expertise is based on their personal experiences. An expert with influence would be somebody who is a qualified or trained professional talking about the thing they are qualified or trained to talk about, but they're also doing it in a kind of a content creation manner. I guess kind of that's what I'm doing as a trained academic criminologist, talking about research on criminology. And this research focused specifically on the health and wellness industry and was published in a journal called Social Media and Society. One of the key findings of the research, and in the research, the researcher interviewed people who were either influencers with expertise or experts with influence about what they did and how they did it, was in many of the influencers, so this is not the experts who influence, this is your normal influencers, consider themselves as some kind of expert. They saw themselves as being a different kind of expert, but still consider themselves as an expert. And this is where we see lived experience and anecdote, so personal experience, being prioritized over scientifically based clinical trials and research evidence. However, as Wellman discovered in her research, she found that influencers weren't just saying this without any kind of disclaimer. They were giving their advice or their experience, but they were also using disclaimers such as, this isn't medical advice, you should go check this with a doctor, and caveated everything with a, I'm just describing my own personal experience. I know we've already said that influencers are probably preying on health anxieties for content and in order to gain the benefits from making content. And perhaps they're even creating new health anxieties in the process of doing so. But I don't actually believe that blaming influencers is the answer to this problem. And for me, that actually opens another question, and that is, how do brands and companies exploit these health anxieties? So we talked about how ferritin and cortisol are things which can only be checked by your biomarkers, so by a blood test. So there's a logical solution to that. The logical solution is to get your bloods checked, to have a blood test. And to be fair to many influencers talking about these things, that's exactly what they suggest that you do. So in that sense, they're not giving misinformation. They're not breaking any rules. They're literally telling us that we should go and get a blood test if we want to get this thing checked. And for some of us, that might mean making an appointment with a GP, but actually it can be a little bit tricky to get a GP appointment these days. It can take quite a long time. And sometimes even when we do go to the GP, particularly women report feeling like they haven't been listened to or their symptoms haven't been taken seriously. And I say this as somebody who has a chronic illness and who has had to battle to have my symptoms taken seriously. Influencers know this. Influencers are just like all the rest of us, and they have experienced this too, and they know that's something which we struggle with. Influencers know this, but so do brands. And here we have seen a huge growth in private blood work companies offering at-home blood testing kits, which just conveniently come through your door. You can do your own blood test and then you can post it back off. You don't even have to go anywhere near the doctors or a hospital to have somebody take your bloods. Now, there's loads of these blood testing companies and there's loads of influencer adverts online for them, normally portraying how simple and easy it is. Thriver and Medichecks, they're just two of them, and I'm just going to use them as examples, although my disclaimer is I'm not saying that they are the only companies doing this or there's particular problems with these companies. They're literally just an example of what is going on. Here is Thriver's website. As we look then at the services which Thriver offer, I thought it's worth also pointing out a little bit of information I found when I was digging around about the history of the company. And they were set up as a startup basically in 2015. They're a UK-based company and they're a health tech startup who's taken advantage of how technology has made transformations in healthcare and what's possible. It's also focused on the idea of like proactive and preventative healthcare rather than reacting. So their target audience isn't sick people, it's well people who want to prevent getting sick. And this development links to academic research, which has been going along around kind of health and health technology developments. And SAC set out in 2018 did a study which they noted how the growth in health apps we see have a tendency not just to influence our health behaviours, but also to influence our economic behaviours. And so that means they're merging health and commercial content in a way which isn't necessarily that obvious, or just normalising that we have a health issue, we buy something to fix it. And this merging of health and economics is a really important factor if we want to understand what's going on here. A second example of a blood testing company would be Medichecks. They've been around longer than Thriver, being established way back in 2001. Now again, as a criminologist talking about this stuff, I really want to reiterate what I'm not saying here is that either of these companies are doing anything wrong or anything illegal. But what is important when we're investigating the broader impact of corporate harms or regulatory loopholes or the hidden harms of something like the wellness industry is to examine how brands can use legal loopholes in regulations to their own advantage. And also show sometimes where the problems with the law are, but that's a separate point. But we also need to understand that influence on our health behaviours is happening within a commercial context. People are actively trying to profit from our health. Both Thriver and Medichecks are registered with the CQC, which oversees healthcare provision in the UK. However, if you dive into the terms and conditions, for example, I dived into Thriver's terms and conditions, you can see that actually not everything they do is overseen and regulated by the CQC. And that's because of the way these companies are set up. This is an important detail which we need to drill down into a little bit, because what it means is that there's certain things which companies do which are exempt from certain aspects of regulation. So in the case of Thriver, the actual blood testing kit part is not covered because you, as the recipient, do it yourself. If you were going into one of their clinics to have it done by one of their doctors, that would have a different set of regulations and requirements to you receiving a kit through your front door and doing it yourself. So if you look at things like 7.4, 7.6, 7.7 in their terms and conditions, you can see the caveats and the exclusions they put on around home blood testing kits. So it is 3 key things I want to note here. One is that providing information on the app after a test is not the same as a medical diagnosis, and they are very, very clear about making that point. It is informational purpose only. If you want to be investigated for a medical condition, you need to go see a doctor. The second point is that many of these companies, which would include Thriva, actually externally outsource the blood testing part of what's happening. And again, this means the regulatory space gets split up. So the lab itself will have been checked for their procedures and their standards and to meet the CQC condition. Doctors, which provide any medical information as part of some of their services, again, will be considered under a certain set of regulations. The kit you get sent will also be covered by a certain set of regulations, but there's gaps between these things, and it's in these digital spaces between the kit being made, the kit being sent to you, or somebody looking at the results of the kit where there's gaps in the regulatory spaces. These gaps matter in terms of us as consumers going onto their app or to their website to find out our results about our information. And then sitting alongside that is a whole bunch of products which are being sold, which can suggest to us that there are things we can buy which we can address these supposed problems we've found as a result of our blood test. And it's this encouragement for customers to buy supplements and things through the app or through the website without medical advice or information, which can cause the problem. Buying supplements you think you need is very, very different to being prescribed them by a doctor. You'll also notice from reading the terms and conditions that it's very, very clearly not aimed at sick people. This is aimed at healthy people without ongoing conditions. It's aimed at people who want to proactively monitor and improve their own health. So this means that they are considered as consumers rather than as patients, which again brings them under a different set of regulations and protections. And in terms of the blood tests which you might receive to do at home, the issue is not that the blood test isn't safe to use. The blood test itself, as in the box and the package and the blood kit, what turns up to your front door, that's all overseen by the Medical and Healthcare Regulatory Authority, or the MHRA in the UK, to make sure that's safe. This is not about suggesting that there's a problem with the blood test kits come out. For me, it's setup of how this information is presented to you where there's more risk for harm. And that's the AI-driven software which powers the app or the back end, the stuff we don't see behind the apps and the websites we're using to get the information, such as the results of our blood test. And the information we're given and the algorithms and the setup which is used to make it is not regulated by the MHRA because it's just information. It's not a medical diagnosis, remember. And so these results are presented in a way which kind of strips the nuance from reading blood test results. Most of us aren't experts in this. We're completely reliant on how it's presented to us and the information which gets presented alongside it. The way it's presented on a digital dashboard, a bit like the way information is presented on our smartwatches and stuff, is it kind of gamifies it. It encourages us to try and beat the markers or to improve the levels. But what it's doing is turning it into this kind of ongoing retail transaction around our health. The idea that we can buy ourselves to be more healthy. And it's this way we access information and what happens to this information where we can start to think about where some of the hidden harms of the wellness industry might be. And these kind of health tech companies, they rely heavily on influencer marketing. So I'm going to bring the influencers back into the picture here. The marketing message very much so is that these tests are the answer. And certainly if we look at TikTok and Instagram adverts about this, it seems to suggest that's the case. And these brands run extensive affiliate marketing programs and spend a huge amount of money on influencer marketing. But the reward for the affiliate creators isn't just about getting people to sign up once. It's also to reward people who continue to subscribe. Influencers have a vested interest in us staying anxious about our health, as do the brands. So I'm going to go back to a research paper which I mentioned earlier. There's this one finding from the authors I'm going to read to you now. Most of the almost 1,000 evaluated posts about 5 popular medical tests from influential accounts on Instagram and TikTok were found to be misleading as they fail to mention potential harms. For all 5 tests examined, there are evidence-informed concerns about the risk of unnecessary diagnosis, and unnecessary treatments. Yet only a small proportion of the posts mentioned this risk of harm. A few posts explicitly referred to evidence, whereas approximately 1/3 included personal anecdotes, and most account holders had some form of financial interest in promoting the test. So for me, if we're thinking about this from a hidden harms context, this point really matters. And that's because of the anxiety which a suboptimal test might give us. It might make us feel like we need to go to the doctor because we're worried something is wrong. That's one, giving us health anxiety, but two, that's putting pressure on GP services. Or we might decide to use the program or the supplements offered by the company who's done our blood test to try and self-solve our problem. What if it's not really a problem? Because actually the research evidence seems to suggest that quite often the results give a misleading or an inconclusive answer. Or what if the problem's missed because we're treating the symptoms, but because we've stepped aside from going to a doctor to have our symptoms properly checked and discussed, an underlying problem is missed. Therefore, in answer to the question, does the wellness industry cause hidden harm? There's 3 important points I want to make so far. 1, influencer marketing preys on health anxieties, but we've talked about how that's not just as simple as saying that like influencers are peddling misinformation or engaging with dodgy practices. So this led us to question, how do brands and companies exploit our health anxieties? And again, this wasn't about brands or companies doing anything illegal or selling us dodgy products, but about how this trend of hacking our wellness markers can be turned into a very lucrative source of income for the brand. It's a retail experience for us where we pay for personalised blood test kits and services which relate to that. The privatisation of the home blood testing kit is aimed at healthy, well people rather than sick people with a problem. It's aimed at preventing a problem and doing what you can to avoid the problem, rather than addressing something which has already happened. So the setup of these health tech companies, alongside their use of affiliate marketing with influencers, allows them to kind of sit around or use to their advantage the regulations and legal positions which sit to look after and control healthcare in the UK. We can also say that they are potentially contributing to more pressure on the NHS whilst setting themselves up as companies to provide the solution to an overpressurised, struggling NHS. Essentially, they're profiting from exploiting our health anxieties and insecurities. The third point is that whilst we can see that this might be exploiting some of our health anxieties, no laws are being broken. It's the regulatory setup which we have, which allows these companies to operate in this way. And this is a point I've got to in some of my other videos on different topics. The issue is actually the fact that health and wellness is something which can be sold to us as a product. And it's the practices of the industry, as well as this overriding tendency to allow consumer industries to self-regulate, combined with a lack of effective regulation of digital products and digital marketing, that allows these things to happen. So you might be thinking, oh yeah, great, there's the answer, this is the end of the video. But actually, for me, there's a whole nother layer which this stuff then makes me ask further questions about. Because the next question I then have is, well, is there a hidden economy underneath all of this? Which takes us beyond looking at just the influencer or the brand when it comes to answering the question about the harms of the wellness industry. Because whilst we're all busy talking about unscrupulous influencers or exploitative brand practices, or even questioning the value and the tactics used in getting us to use these at-home blood testing kits, the apps which we use to monitor our health and our wellness are all quietly collecting loads and loads and loads of very, very detailed information about us. And so this collection of our physical, our mental health and wellness and all of the activities which relate to that is creating this incredibly detailed profile picture of us. And what this picture does is essentially allows the mass harvesting of our most intimate personal data. So I don't know about you, I log my training on Strava. I use a period tracking app. I often log my food into my MyFitnessPal to make sure I'm eating enough protein and my macronutrients are there. If I'm monitoring my weight, I might be entering my weight details as well. I also sleep with my Garmin on. I'm monitoring my sleep and the quality of my sleep. My training readiness score and HRV and all these other factors give a sense of how well my body is coping, or an indication of whether I'm suffering with fatigue. So whether we're using Garmin or other brands such as Whoop, all of this data is being collected and pulled on us. But it doesn't just stay in our phone or on our watch or in our Whoop band. It's silently packaged up and sent back to the servers. Now, these servers will allow for open APIs to use the data, and there's some positive stuff which happens with some of the open source data. However, it also connects to other apps and platforms such as Meta, and all of this information gets connected back to Meta. So essentially what happens is Meta can get this data alert when something might not be right with it, or something which just sparks the interest of an algorithm which is set to keep an eye on what's going on. And basically, it sets us up with a user profile which is subject to AI scoring. And this AI scoring makes our profiles ripe for targeting, adverts, and marketing. To see how social media platforms have a really important role in this, you can go onto your own Facebook and you can have a look at your off Facebook activity and see how many apps and services are giving information about you to Facebook, so to Meta. And that's also on top of all of the stuff you're engaging with when you're on Meta's platforms. So if you're interested in actually having a look at your Meta profile, then you can do this yourself. So if you open your Facebook app, tap on your profile icon and the settings and privacy part, tap the account center, and then scroll down, look at your information and permissions. You can then select your activity off Meta Technologies, and then select manage your off Meta activity. And then depending on what your settings are and what permissions you have and haven't accepted, once you go into this, you can then see a whole range of different apps, interfaces and place, and how all these various apps and services are connecting your data with Meta. But as well as looking at what your own settings are saying, you can also have a look at what Meta and their terms and conditions are saying about how they use this data and what they're doing with it. And a really important thing to note is that Meta tell you they're not selling your data to a third party. And to be clear to Meta, I'm not accusing them of selling any data to a third party. Kind of what's happening here is a bending of a reality of what it means to share your data with a third party. If you go into Meta's business tools and the terms and conditions for using Meta's business tools, so this is other companies who might want to use Meta's business tools, the T's and C's show things are a little bit more hidden. And this is done through custom event tracking. And so Meta is not selling your data, they're selling access to your attention based on the data they hold about you. And actually, Meta have a vested interest in not selling your data, because they're keeping your data to themselves, but they can sell access to an understanding about you without giving any of your data to a third party. So for example, a company like Thriver or Medichecks, so they might go to Meta and ask Meta to identify, using their internal algorithms, women of a certain age who are experiencing particular symptoms like fatigue, low energy or broken sleep. Or women in the age range between 20 and 40 who engage regularly in endurance sports like triathlon, Ironman, or marathons, as we're seeing kind of really popular happen at the moment. And then these companies can pay for adverts to be placed on your social media platforms, which will target you as a user who's been identified as somebody who fits these criteria. And if multiple companies want your access to your attention, then essentially there can be an auction for your attention. So the various companies will put in their highest offer, and then the person who's willing to pay the most money might be the one who then gets the access to your data, or to your attention rather than your data. When I was looking into this, there's even companies which advise companies on how to win the Meta bidding auctions. So there's industries upon industries based on your attention and your personal biometric health data. This is how valuable the data is. And this data doesn't need to be sold. Meta doesn't need to give it to any third parties. The third parties are coming begging to Meta for access the information which Meta holds. So Meta is matching rather than giving out information, and then they can use this to charge huge amounts of money and ad revenue for companies to make sure your eyes are the ones who see this targeted advert about blood testing kits. So you'll get this highly targeted advert the next time you open your Instagram or your Facebook. Now, there are a couple of key enforcement cases around Meta, which suggests that there may be some question marks around some of their practices, certainly in the past, with people's data. So in January 2023, BBC News reported on a 346 million fine issued to Meta for breaking EU data rules. And the fine was actually in euros, but this is what they converted it as. And this followed a ruling which said that Facebook and Instagram cannot force consent by saying that consumers have to accept how their data is used or leave the platform. So this relates to the kind of things we sign up for when we use a platform terms and conditions. And often we can't opt out of things anymore. We basically have to agree to what they say or we can't use Instagram. And again, since 2025, Meta has had to make some changes around how they use health information and health data, particularly in relation to sensitive health data and advertising. So AZM, who are a health marketing agency, they describe that while legal punishments for these violations have centred on advertisers in the past, lawsuits against Meta for various health privacy compromises likely made the status quo untenable. But as a result, Meta's health advertising policy posture is shifting from encouraging compliance to actively preventing misuse of its platforms. I don't really want to get into this kind of like ins and outs of the practices and the enforcement cases, because this video is not really about the platform logics and the way these things work. The point I want to make this is if we're asking the question, how does the wellness industry harm you? We know that we can't just blame influencers for peddling dodgy products, and we can't just blame brands and companies for selling you the dodgy product or exploiting you. But by looking at the data harvesting economy, or what I would prefer to call it is the attention harvesting economy, we can see that algorithms connect our real-time habits and issues and problems, whether they're real problems or not, to a tailored marketing program. We could say that we're essentially being digitally hunted by these health tech companies. While we're at our most anxious or vulnerable about particular issues is when we're most likely to see an advert which is going to tell us they have a solution for it or something which can help us address this thing we're worrying about. So when a perfectly timed influencer unboxing a home blood test kit, which is really easy to use and really simple and, you know, solves all of your concerns and worries, yeah, okay, I'm interested. I'm going to watch this reel. I'm going to look into this product. And you know what? With that 10% off code, I'm going to sign up and buy it. So we're getting these ads at the point where we're most likely to sign up. And that's not happening by chance. That is planned. That's targeted. But of course, with social media, the way social media platform algorithms work is all of a sudden, everyone around us is buying this or getting this and doing this. We feel like we are one of a group of people who's experiencing the same thing and taking the same action. So the social media echo chamber only serves to reinforce these decisions and these concerns and the solution we're going to use to address them. Do I blame influencers for wellness industry scams? No, I don't. You could actually argue that influencers are just being used or being exploited in the same way we are. Perhaps their own health issues or insecurities are what led them to being an influencer in this space in the first place. But if we're just going to get mad at the unscrupulous influencer, then no one is questioning the hidden stuff which is happening below the surface. By trying to blame a set of individuals, it can give us a satisfaction for having somebody to place the blame on and to hold accountable for a specific issue or harm or action, or perhaps a crime if they're breaking the law and, you know, advertising something in a way they shouldn't be by making misleading or false claims. In the same way as if a company is selling a product in a way which is making false claims, we can attach individual blame to these things. But if we only think about the individual components, we're not questioning the bigger system about what's going on. Because focusing on the individuals doesn't look at the conditions which are happening, which enable things like corporate crime and corporate harm to be happening on a mass scale. And we know if we look at Meta's fines, there have been some regulatory breaches going on at some point. We are right to be asking these kind of questions from a corporate crime point of view. But perhaps it's about time we start to ask the questions about where some of the real harms and crimes are happening in our society. Technology and the economy have come together to create health as something which can be purchased. We can't just make this simply about individuals behaving immorally or unethically. So the next time you see an influencer trying to sell you the latest lifestyle hack, then I want you to stop and I want you to question. Take a moment and then ask, is this person trying to harvest my attention? And if the answer is yes, don't give them your attention. Don't engage in it. Don't like it. Don't watch it. And certainly don't reshare it. Remind yourself, though, before you get angry or blame them, that they're actually just one part of a very small bit of a big problem. There's this entire attention harvesting economy which is setting out to play into your fears, your anxieties, and your insecurities about your wellness and your health. So I hope that you have enjoyed this video and perhaps learned something new. This is part one of a really short mini series on the wellness industry, digging into some of the hidden harm. So rather than just doing the usual focusing on toxic products or influencer scams, I'm trying to get below the surface of what's happening with the wellness industry and drawing on my long-standing research interests in illicit markets and consumer crime and consumer harm of industries. So in part two, I'm going to take a closer look at biohacking. So make sure you're subscribed to the channel. You don't want to miss this.